We're delighted to be here with you in Riyadh at the Saudi Media Forum. My name is Noreen Hegarty. I'm Editor-in-Chief of List magazine. We're part of the Saudi Research Media Group, and I'm based here in Riyadh. I've been living here for the last year. Prior to that, I suppose the last 15 years I've spent in digital transformation with Lonely Planet as part of the global leadership team, and then with the London Times as the Ireland editor. And I'm joined by Juan Senor, who's head of innovation at the Media Consultancy Group. And Juan is a prominent Spanish media consultant and president of Innovation Media Consulting, specializing in media strategies and newsroom restructuring. He also has extensive experience in transformation, digital transformation, and is known for his role as a television presenter and moderator, in addition to his passion for exploration and advocacy for disability issues. And also here with us is Raju Narasetti, who's Global Publishing Director at McKinsey & Company, based in New York. He's a prominent Indian journalist and media professional, and he's held leadership positions in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, contributing to the advancement of digital strategies in journalism. He currently serves as Global Publishing Director at McKinsey & Company, leading innovation and media content. So we're very delighted to be here with you and to discuss our topic for today, which is paid digital journalism, an anchor or a lifeline. And we're going to be talking about digital paywalls, strategies for achieving media sustainability and digital transformations, exploring those challenges and opportunities that come with this economic model, and also its impact on media organizations and their audiences. And I think we'll start off, Juan, by coming to you first and talking about that challenge that is there for media organizations, and how do you manage the business model that is required, and then having your journalism available to the widest possible audience. And is there an inherent dilemma in that? I know certainly in my experience as a journalist, when you're breaking a big story, you want it to go out to as many people as possible, and equally you want to make sure that you're keeping your subscribers happy. So how do you approach that challenge?
Yes, I mean, that's a classic dilemma. If I lose audience, will I lose influence? And this is something that was a great preoccupation for a lot of news media operations way back, about 15 years ago, when a lot of them were beginning to experiment with paywalls. And this was their main preoccupation, that if my objective is to reach a wide audience and to have impact and influence, in losing audience, will I lose that influence? And the answer is no. The answer is news media today that have put most of their content behind a paywall or a freemium model are as influential as they were ever in the past, namely the Wall Street Journal, where Raju used to work, the Times in London, El País in Spain. So that's a false equivalency, it's a false dichotomy to associate you losing that audience with losing that influence. But it's counterintuitive, because initially you think, well, indeed I must get the biggest audience I can get. And the answer in journalism is not a big audience, but the right audience. And if you get the right audience, your journalism will be shared, will be impactful, it makes its way elsewhere. So being behind a paywall is by no means a detriment to your influence and your impact.
And Raju, has your experience been similar? How have you approached that?
Yeah, and I think it's good to set a little bit of context, right? Which is that ever since media existed, at least commercial media, it's always been paid for, except for the first 20 years of the internet, when we kind of gave it away, thinking that advertising will make up for it. So in a way, going back to the idea that like you would have at least dual sources of revenue, advertisers and audiences, is actually going back to the future in some ways, right? And I think if you look at some of the numbers, the Reuters Institute does a periodic study, and Juan actually spends a lot of time researching this as well. Between 2017 and now, about 67% of European and US news organizations have some sort of a digital paywall. In the US, it's gone from 60 to 76% in the last 7 years. So the trend is towards almost all of them starting to charge audiences for something. And if you talk to most CEOs of media companies, a vast majority of them say that subscriptions is now just going to be another source of revenue. So I think in some ways nobody's kind of backing away from that. But to your point, Noreen, all of the challenges of how do you grow and how do you reach particularly younger audiences who may consume some news, but their propensity to pay is highly questionable. So I think that's the biggest challenge in terms of like, how do you want to continue to be relevant to a younger audience and get them to maybe think of like, there is enough value that I want to pay for it.
And what do we have to do to engage that audience? Because all the studies would tell us that Gen Z are switching off. They don't want the negativity of news. They want, their interests are elsewhere. And to your point, a lot of them have grown up expecting news is free, expecting that they're going to get it on social media and it's a top line and that's all they need. How do we come at that in this era, where it is, in order to have journalism that pays, you've got to charge people?
I mean, it's it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts as well. I think it's a relatively good news story in the sense that I am of a certain age, and the idea of like paying for news digitally was very new at that time, right? But my kids who are about 19 and 21 have grown up in an era where paying for content, entertainment content mostly, or music, is the norm, right? So 16% of Americans pay for digital news, 22% of Americans and Canadians pay for Netflix. So clearly, the idea of paying is not an issue anymore. The question is like convincing them that there's a value exchange, right? And there are multiple ways of doing this. One is clearly showing that consuming quality news is good for you because it keeps you informed and it separates fact from fiction. That's one. Yeah. Two, this idea that like usually payment also involves some level of personalization because you tell them who you are, they know who you are. And then this idea that then you can personalize it and give you the kind of things that you are most interested in, and there's value there. And then places like the New York Times have figured out that bundling of a range of products, not just news, but news with recipes, with like shopping, sports, puzzles, is actually another way of like saying collectively there is value, right? So I think there are lots of ways to kind of think about the value exchange, and different audiences, depending on age and demographics, have different cues that you can provide.
Juan, you're at the cutting edge of this dilemma. I mean, how important is trust? What are the factors that lead people to, bind themselves to a brand or a title? And do they stay? Is there sustainability? Is there a model there that ensures that they stick with you?
Yeah, so I think you need to look at the facts. And the facts are the following. Every morning, globally, 3 billion people wake up every morning and read legacy media, legacy news media. This idea that there's a lack of trust or there's a lack of audience, that there's this generational gap, that Gen Z doesn't trust news, is not true. It is just simply not true. The New York Times has 150 million unique visitors every month. CNN, 175 million unique visitors every month. You take every single main news legacy media in every country, at least in Europe, where the innovation is coming from. The States, there's very little innovation other than the New York Times. But the real innovation in terms of business models and sustainability and so on, and engagement with audiences, is coming from Europe. And young people are not the issue for news media. People pay for news when they pay taxes. Right. And that's always been like this. And this idea that somehow, because young people who are below the age of 22, who are still not political agents, they're not out there where their taxes could be raised, whoever's in power could affect their bottom line, their family decisions, their business decisions, when they're still dependent and going to university, and so they've never paid for news. They never did in the past. They consume news. A lot of it was the newspaper, the library, a university, or the parents' newspaper. But somehow we've associated, social media is not news media. And social media gets, every morning, 4 billion people check social media, but 3 billion people check news media. So we're doing very well, thank you very much. And it's a great business. It's having more impact than ever before in terms of reaching a wide audience. And there's absolutely no problem with charging for some of that content. Now, the key thing to explore, particularly in this region, is what is the optimal model? So if you assume that young people, eventually when they become political agents, social agents, they will pay for news, what is the ideal model, right? And that's the key question. And so discounting the subscription, we have a lot of quality legacy news media that is offering free subscriptions to young people who are registered at a university, and when you finish university, you have to pay or not. So doing a freemium model where you give a lot of discounted to university students initially, or people of a certain age, is a good model, and thereafter they're more than willing to pay for. So we don't believe that there is this generational gap. Gen Z are reading news more than any generation in the past. And they come across their news, perhaps on TikTok, perhaps on Instagram, but it comes from legacy media. And they know, they instinctively know what comes from a quality brand and what doesn't. And if you ask them, oh, but have you heard of the Wall Street Journal? Yes, we have. Do you know The Economist? Yes, I do. So it's very surprising. And the problem is that, you know, attacking the media has become a form of politics, and they've associated us with social media. And therefore, if there's something that is dodgy in social media, somehow it gets associated with legacy media. And therefore, there's this issue of trust. But when you really drill deep into that question, is young people don't trust news in their social media. But once they see it coming branded from legacy media, they trust it, and they read it, and they consume it. And in due course, they pay for it.
Right. I'm interested to explore a little bit more. You mentioned there about that there's no innovation coming from the United States, and the innovation is coming from Europe. And I think any of us that are involved in media, certainly over the last 15 years or so, it's been very much that message of do more with less. And it's been about reduction. And how do you reconcile that with then offering something to subscribers that is unique and different and worth paying for?
Yeah. I mean, the problem with the States, obviously, the New York Times started this process of transformation a long time ago. They were the first ones. The other ones started too late to begin with. And the Wall Street Journal is, in a way, irrelevant to perhaps this region unless you're in a business brand, because it's paid by your company, right? So very few of the subscriptions are personal subscriptions. So it's a corporate expense, you can write it off. But they've struggled getting to people to reader revenue because it started too late, and also because their content proposition is not worth paying for. And at the end of the day, that's the key thing. Do you have something, what Raj saying, do you have something of value? Do you have journalism worth paying for? And if your journalism is officialist, if your journalism is a newsletter, where you're just announcing what's happening in your community, and you're not really doing proper journalism, it's very difficult to convince people to pay for it, right? But look, 7 years ago, in every European capital, every single legacy newspaper was pretty much bankrupt. Le Monde, El País, Die Welt, La Repubblica, the Times of London, the Telegraph. 7 years later, today, every single one of these newspapers is making money. Le Monde is making 8 million euros this year. El País is making more than 1 million. La Repubblica is breaking even. The Times of London is making money. The Guardian is cash flow positive. Die Welt is making money. So all these people have made the transition. And what was the cornerstone? What's the key? Charging for content. And unless and until you get to 40% of your revenue coming from readers, there's no sustainability. And that's the magic formula. And you have to figure out, how do I get that? And again, do I have a product worth paying for? And that's the process. And it's back to what Raj was saying, is back to the beginning. At the beginning, news media was paid for. And we have an original sin. We made a big mistake 30 years ago when the internet started, and we believed that, that if you build it, they will come, that we had to give it all for free, that it was a volume play. And free has turned out to be very expensive.
Right, absolutely. Raji, coming back to the United States again, because I know you're based in New York, what we're talking about really is in terms of national titles, the big titles. How does that play out when it comes to the smaller, the hometown newspapers, all of those traditional media outlets that, service communities? How do you reconcile a paywall there and the, I suppose, the community service of providing journalism?
I mean, first of all, there's a misconception that even though the numbers I'm talking about saying that 75% have a paywall, there's a misconception that like most news is behind a paywall. The reality in the US is that almost every television station has a website which is free, right? So as a result, the availability of free news is fairly widespread. What has happened, I think, is that there's a bit of a barbell effect where the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, to a certain extent maybe the Washington Post, are doing very well. And then at the other end, a lot of digital startups are doing very well, offering very niche products, news you can use, service journalism, events, a whole range of things. It's the middle that has become a bit more challenged. And some of that is driven by the fact that they have not been as digitally savvy as they needed to be. There's also been a little bit of a let the economics drive the content, which is usually not a good idea, because I think Juan talks about this, journalists need to run journalism. I'll give you, there was a recent study that actually came out in January. They looked at like 17 regional papers in the US, which are behind a paywall. And since they did the paywall, there's been a 5% reduction in local news, but there's been a much less reduction in what's called soft news. So they're trying to kind of create content that they think the audience would pay for. That could be pretty fatal, right? Because at the end of the day, if you live in a community and if you feel like your local newspaper is not serving you in being a watchdog, in being all sorts of things that we expect, chances that you would pay for that are going to be a lot less, because the soft journalism is available nationally. Right? So I think these are the kind of decisions that those who are thinking of like business models should be thinking, and it should be really what is it that the audience needs that I can uniquely give, rather than try to kind of say, if I give them Hollywood and this and that they would pay for it, because that's the most challenged space.
Right, absolutely. And in your expertise, Juan, what are the models that are the most successful? Is it that you're offering a certain amount of content for free and then you're putting up the paywall? Is it that you have a hard paywall when a reader comes in, it has to become a subscriber? What's been your experience of what works?
Yeah, I think the paywall journey is a journey, and our advice is to do it in 3 stages, right? So it's a 3-tier freemium model. So you begin with the top of your funnel is free, and that's where you get your volume, and that's where you get people coming into your brand. And then you have to introduce a data wall. The data wall is as important as the paywall. And we put a lot of focus on the bottom, which is the paywall. The natural conversion rate for a quality news brand is only 3%. So, if you have whatever it is in terms of unique visitors at the top, only 3% will pay for it. However, 10% will register and will give you their data. And that's where the journey begins. And to those people, you begin to give them additional value. So you give them, you can listen to the story. You can get the newsletters, you can get the podcast, so you can comment if you register. And then further down, you get into the paywall, right? The 3% conversion rate, and that's the hard paywall. So the model is a 3-tier freemium model, and this is been proven to be the least violent, if I may, way of navigating people to eventually having to pay for it. But it's a little bit like, if you look at the museum business, right? If you think of museums have this issue for a long time. Museums are always free, and they were considered subsidized by the government because of their cultural values and so on. And they've discovered that if they do special exhibitions, so if you're at the British Museum and you bring Tutankhamun, that's a freemium model. So the museum is free, but the Tutankhamun exhibition, you need to pay for it. You pay quite a premium, and there's a shop on the way out, and that works. So it's the same thing. Think of your news site the same way. You come in, it's free. You can, so reportorial journalism, it's very difficult for you to charge for it, right? What happened, where it happened, when it happened. So plane crashes, sort of body count journalism, that's very difficult to charge for because in the age of X and so on, it's a commodity, right?
Yes.
But what there is value is what's next, why it happened, and what it means. So there you can begin to charge. So it is a process, and it has to be very flexible. You experiment where to put your data wall and where to put your paywall according to demand. So you have to quickly see the audience on a daily basis. What is triggering registrations and what is triggering subscriptions? And they're two different things, right? So we don't like to talk about subscriptions, we like to talk about membership. A membership is a different thing altogether.
Right.
It's a completely different concept, right? When you're a member of a club, you belong to that club. And if your brand is a good legacy brand, a lot of these brands have their love brands, right?
Yes.
We've just relaunched L'Étampe in Geneva this past year, and we focused on the registration for the data wall being all focused on the love brand. If you ask anybody in Geneva, L'Étampe is such a
Yes.
evocative brand.
Yes.
So you get a tote bag, and
Yes.
you get freebies, and you're a member, and then after a while, you begin to get asked for payment, right? And in that model, we've increased subscriptions 5% and registrations 15%. And sometimes the data is as valuable as the dollars.
Yes.
Because if I know who you are and I've got significant data about you, I can market to you.
Yes.
And this is the key of publishing. Publishing was based on having a direct relationship with a reader. So if I have a direct relationship with you, I can dictate what content I give you,
Yes.
what price I charge you, with what frequency, because I have that data. So having the data wall is almost as important as having your paywall. But unfortunately, a lot of people, especially in this region, we have lots of clients here, and talking to them, they're thinking, well, it's either free or paid.
Yes.
No, there's a middle journey to take you through that really pays off.
And of course, your technology has to support your
It
data
does.
wall in the first instance. Sorry, Roger, you were going to come in there.
Yeah, the point I wanted to add was I think we tend to focus a lot on the content and the journalism, and that's getting somewhat commoditized and getting a little harder to separate yourself. But the area I think where there's actually significant value that you can still extract, if you will, is this idea of an experience layer on top of your content layer. I'll give you a recent example. Time magazine is known for its Man of the Year or
Yes.
Person of the Year, and this previous one was President Trump in the US. But they teamed up with an AI company called Scale and offered the same article to those who are registered and those who are paying. To first, you can consume it in 7 different languages. There was an interactive element. You could ask questions. You could do a lot more with it. So that experience layer, while everybody could write about President Trump,
Yes.
what Time magazine brought to a registered paying reader was so different that that experience is worth paying for. I think that that's what a lot of like smart news organizations are doing. Clarin in Argentina has used again AI to kind of say, what are decisive articles? And they find that if you put a decisive article behind a paywall, the number of people willing to pay,
Right.
subscribe, really goes up. And they aim to now do 10 to 12 decisive articles a day. So that's how they are thinking about separating, so which is an experience layer issue. And I think if you add that to good content, which is table stakes in some ways, you have a lot more propensity to get people to think there's value and be willing to pay for it.
Very interesting. And back to, I suppose, the core of everything is understanding your audience, knowing what you can market to them, knowing what they're interested in terms of the decisive articles, and that fear of missing out if you're not subscribed, if your identity isn't with that particular brand.
Right.
I'm going to open questions to the floor. If any of our audience members here have anything they'd like to ask our panel, or any comments that anybody would like to make. We've got a shy audience today, but I think, yes, we've got a question here, please. Do we have a mic?
So I'm wondering, just thinking loudly, if me as the audience is paying, and of course the news when you get it is also paid, like, it's not authentic anymore as the media. It's not authentic as before. Now everything is paid. So like any ideas, anything will be passed by who pays more, which means that it's not original, it's not authentic, it's not real, it's not the media that me as an audience will go back and say, I'll pay for it. Why will I pay for it if everything is paid already?
I'll pass that to our panelists. Juan, do you want to respond?
I think if you reverse logic that, if something is free, it has no value, right? The basics of human transaction is that something has a cost, something has a value. So if you go out and about here and they give you a freebie, okay, it's nice to have, but it really, you associate that thing as something that is not worth considering because it's been given to you for free. So the key question is, do you have something worth paying for? And at the end of the day, in any human transaction, that's the litmus test. And unfortunately, when we look at some news media in this region, they're very far away from producing content worth paying for. You're beginning to have niche, specialized media that is really worth paying for. But a lot of the news media here, it's very officialist, very statist, which is its purpose, and it's where you come from. But it's when you begin to do journalism that really addresses people's lives, service journalism, consumer journalism, that you really, people see the value and will be willing to pay for it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, in any economic, in any human transaction, we have essentially devalued the news business by giving it for free. It's just, it's almost, you know, imagine if Netflix, everything is free. Go to the movies, everything's free. Popcorn is free. Just, and that's what we've done. We're sending a message to readers that there's nothing here worth paying for. And I think looking at this region, which is interesting, you know, we worked the last 8 months with An-Naha in Lebanon, and that has a freemium model. It's working. Al-Kabas in Kuwait is already charging for content, and it's working to a certain degree. So this idea that in this region you cannot charge for journalism is not true. There's plenty of examples as well of other news media, but a lot of the news brands will need to go through a journey of finding what is my niche, what is my voice, and how do I revalue something that I've given for free for so long.
Thank you, Juan. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we can't take any other questions. But I'd like to thank Raju and Juan sincerely for your time. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I hope you all have a very good time at the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.